Shabbat Shalom. So, in the old country, let's say, the rabbi used to be a civil judge as well. I mean, still not impossible, but it's never happened to me. But two people could have a commercial or personal dispute, and they would go to the rabbi to solve, right? So the first litigant tells his story to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, you're right. And then the second litigant comes to the rabbi and tells his side, and the rabbi says, you're right. Right? And the rabbi's wife has been hearing this whole thing, and she says to him, look, they can't both be right. And he looks at his wife and he says, yeah, you're right. And I want to explore that question of both being right through, I mentioned this verse in my introduction to the Torah reading, Genesis 32, verse 8. The night before Jacob is to encounter Esau after many years, they parted on not the best of terms, and he doesn't know if there will be a battle. And the text says that Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, right? And the question is, aren't they the same thing? Greatly afraid and distressed? And we have a number of sources going back to a Talmudic midrash, but then brought in Rashi, that no, they're not the same thing. He's afraid that he might be killed, right? He's distressed that he might have to kill, right? And along comes a much more recent commentary, Siftei Chachamim, which is a commentary on Rashi, right? I mean, we don't just have commentaries. We have commentaries on commentaries, right? Or it's a genre known as the super commentary. And Siftei Chachamim doesn't like Rashi's answer, because he says, why should Jacob be distressed that he might have to kill? Right? I mean, why would he kill Esau? He killed Esau because Esau is attacking, right? And the Talmud is very, very clear, right? Haba l'horgecha, hashke l'horgo. Right? If you know that somebody is coming to kill you, get up earlier and kill him first. Right? So if he might kill, it's because Esau is attacking you. Right? And of course, Jacob knew the Talmud. Right? So, right, if I'm killing in self-defense, that's perfectly legitimate, right? I'm killing in self-defense, that's perfectly legitimate, but why should that distress me, right? I'm acting within halakha, I'm doing something that is perfectly allowed, right? But Jacob is nevertheless distressed, right? Just because something is legal doesn't mean it isn't problematic, right? That's the nature of a dilemma, right? Neither course of action is fully satisfactory, right? And I'll give you a small example, right? So in the last week, right, about, I think the total number, 100 some odd hostages have been freed, right? Like 70 Israeli women and children, plus a number of non-Israelis, mostly Thai, but also from other countries. And there's been a lot of rejoicing in Israel over those hostages being freed, right? And the question is, Should we rejoice over the hostages who have been freed? Or should we continue to be distressed over those who are still being held hostage, right? And the answer is, of course, both, right? You can hold to thought, right? But I have to say that if I am, I think to myself, if I am a relative of somebody who's still being held hostage, this had to be a very painful week for me, right? I'm glad for the other people who have been freed and for their families, but and this is right. This is the nature of a dilemma, right? And you know, and so Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and you could always count on Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and this is what he says about this, or said about this situation. Right, a moral system which leaves room for the existence of dilemmas is one that does not attempt to eliminate the complexities of the moral life. In a conflict between two rights or two wrongs, there may be a proper way to act, the lesser of two evils or the greater of two goods, but this does not cancel out all emotional pain. A righteous individual may sometimes be one who is capable of distress, even when they know they have acted rightly. What the Midrash is telling us is that Judaism recognizes the existence of dilemmas. Despite the intricacy of Jewish law and its meta-halakhic principles for deciding which of two duties takes priority, we may still be faced with situations in which there is an ineliminable cause for distress. It was Jacob's greatness that he was capable of moral anxiety, even at the prospect of doing something entirely justified, namely defending his life at the cost of his brothers, right? And there's always a pulpit rabbi who's got to give a drasha every week. I mean, on the one hand, it's really been incredible that every week in the Parsha, there's been something directly relevant to the situations that we're facing now, right? It says in the Talmud, Maaseh Avot Siman Labani, that the acts of the patriarchs and matriarchs are a sign for their descendants, right? And that, I think, is what makes the Torah so powerful, is that we can look at the choices that our ancestors had to make and read ourselves into that story, right? But on the other hand, right, so I have to get this stuff printed before Shabbat, and you wake up and you don't know what's gonna be, right? And so at the time that I first prepared this drasha, I didn't know whether the ceasefire would be extended, right? And I didn't know, but so Tony Blinken was in Israel, and he said to the Israelis, look, if you resume the fighting, you have to be more careful about civilian, right? And they agreed, and now the United States official position is that they are actually being more careful about civilian casualties, but we'll see what happens, right? But and I mentioned in the introduction to the Torah, right, that Jacob was mad at Shimon and Levi because of what they did to the inhabitants of Shem, and not so much that he felt it was necessarily wrong, as that it would put him in a difficult position, in a tough neighborhood, right? And there's a certain reality, right? That why why were civilian casualties so high? Right? Why were they so high in the first part of it? Right? Because Hamas is embedded among the civilian population, right? I mean, we had a situation, which is verified, right? Where, Israel dropped a bomb on an ambulance. How horrible, Israel dropping a bomb on an ambulance. Right, well, there was 15 Hamas soldiers in that ambulance, okay? The rocket that Israel dropped on a hospital, which killed 500 people, which turned out it wasn't Israel, it was the parking lot, and it was about 100 people, right? But why was that so deadly? Because the parking lot of the hospital was being used as an ammunition depot, right? And when you have an army, a terrorist army, embedded among the civilian population, right? And look, I mean, I know from this absolutely nothing, right? But you don't have to know a lot that if you're fighting an army which is embedded amongst the civilian population, right? You can drop a lot of bombs on them, right? And you'll kill a lot of bad guys, and you'll kill a lot of civilians, right? Or what's the other alternative? You can go from house to house and block to block, and you'll kill far fewer civilians, right? But you'll lose a lot more of your own soldiers, right? And here is my question. Which is the morally correct way to proceed in that situation? Which is the morally correct way to proceed? Right? Does anybody know? Right. None of us know. What?
The morally correct position is for planners not to embed themselves in civilian.
Right. That's the morally correct decision. But that's not who we're dealing with. Right? We're not dealing with an enemy that views themselves as bound by the Geneva Convention or the laws of war. They view themselves as bound by their particular perverse interpretation of the Quran, right? So you're absolutely correct, right? But, unfortunately, you don't pick your enemies, right? Yeah.
The United States made the decision to drop the bomb on Hiroshima because they had the same thing basically. Go into Japan and not house to house, but still doing the same thing.
Right. Was that the right decision? I don't know.
And who is?
What?
And who is?
Well, I'm asking you. Right, I mean, what? Well, yeah, it ended the war, right? Okay, I mean, I get it, but you understand the point is, look, it's not my place, right, to evaluate the morality of a decision that was made 15 years before I was, right? The point is, right, and you've heard me quote this before, I'm pretty sure it was H.L. Mencken who said it, right? Every problem has a solution which is simple, elegant, and wrong, right? And I can create an argument that justifies continued aerial bombardment, and I can create an argument that forbids continued aerial bombardment. And each one of those arguments would be airtight, right? And, just like, frankly, we can be happy for the hostages who were released and sad about those who are being held in captivity, we can recognize the absolute right and necessity for Israel to act in self-defense and get rid of Hamas, and still be distressed for Palestinian non-combatants who are being killed and suffering, right? And this is the Jewish way, right? I mean, if you look at how we observe Pesach, right? We spill the drops of wine, okay, but we also, the last days of Pesach don't say full holiday, right? Also because of the Egyptians who were killed, right? Because full holiday is greater rejoicing than half holiday, right? So we say half holiday because we rejoice over our own liberation, but only half holiday because we're distressed about the death of the Egyptians, right? And frankly, anybody who says you're disloyal because you express concern about Palestinian casualties is not familiar with the moral complexity of the Jewish tradition. And I myself, I have no answer. I really have no answer other than to recognize that it's a dilemma and something can be legal and still problematic. It can be legal according to halakha, and it can be legal according to the law of warfare and still problematic. And now somebody who knows more about this than I do, Mike.
No, on the contrary, my question is because we follow Israeli press very closely. Has the government of Israel spoken about how to end this by Hamas surrendering and getting out of there so that the pressure is off Israel but put onto Hamas? It isn't Israel's fault, it's Hamas's fault because they haven't given up and gotten out after being told that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's the Israeli position, right? That is the Israeli position, that the war will end, right? The war will end and the bombardment will end and the border crossings will be fully reopened when all of the hostages are freed and Hamas surrenders, okay? And surrender, I don't imagine that they think that they're gonna actually hand themselves over to the IDF, but they'll do like what the PLO did in Lebanon in '82, right? They all went off to Tunis, okay? So they'll go off to Qatar or, someplace like that. And that's the official Israeli position, right? The question is, right, is that likely to happen? And if it doesn't happen, I mean, the point is that in my book, every civilian casualty is laid at the feet of Hamas without question. Okay, that doesn't mean it's not still morally problematic. And it doesn't mean that, as Jacob said, it's not pragmatic for other reasons, right? I mean, Israel had a lot of support on October 7th and October 8th, right? If you follow the polling, Israel's losing support, right? That's not inconsequential, right? That's not inconsequential. It's not inconsequential for Israel. is not inconsequential for the future of our country. Right, right, I don't wanna go there, but you all know what I mean. Right, I mean, if young people decide, I can't vote for Biden because of Israel. I won't even say it, but you know what I mean, right? So it's a problem, it is a problem, and obviously, the solution, and hope, look, and that's the US position too, I mean, there, in this sense, there's no daylight between Israel and the Biden administration or the State Department, right? Hamas cannot be allowed to stay in power, but as I said, I mean, the power of our tradition is to recognize the existence of dilemmas, and, you know, it's a real problem. So thank you for, listening, and Shabbat Shalom. We continue with, the cottage reform Musaf 155 or 428. The Musaf Amidah beginning on 156 or 430 will stay the